Shireen, gender equality is a topical subject, but according to the World Economic Forum, women's earning power is 10 years behind where men were.
It will take women 100 years to reach parity on all levels as men. 100 years. That's not in my lifetime, and it's certainly not in your lifetime. So when you talk about the gender pay gap of where women find themselves now, we're never going to reach parity if we continue to do the things that we are doing in terms of practices, in terms of policy, and in terms of women's own aspirations and ambition.
To add more complexity to it, I mean, if we look at 2 generations before, there were less women entering the university system, but that number has increased as well. But we're not seeing the commensurate income and positions for women in business.
2 years ago, I did a research piece around women who were graduating at university level, because we kept hearing there's a skill shortage. There's not enough women to take up these positions. Did you know that 60% of our graduates in 2012 were women? But you then had to break it down to see in which faculties or which technical areas were they being qualified. And so the discussion then becomes which particular roles do women take up in organizations if they have a humanities degree versus an engineering or an accounting degree. If you look at the belly of organizations, you'll find that women with qualifications are sitting in the middle of organizations. So the middle is bloated because they are filling administrative, support roles, marketing, HR, and so on. You find me any CEO who has gone to be that position with an HR or a marketing background versus hard skills like engineering or a CA qualification coupled with the MBA, do the numbers, and you will see that the kind of qualifications that women are coming out with may not be the kind of qualification that's going to move them up the leadership trajectory.
Yet at the same time, Shireen, if we look at some of the consistently countries who come up at the top in terms of gender equality, the Scandinavian countries, for example, have managed to achieve that. What is it that they've done that other countries haven't been able to do?
Just to go back to my earlier point, it's at 3 levels. It's at the macro level. So what policies are put in place and how it's measured and evaluated. Because we may argue that we have policies in place and legislation in place in our country, but we don't follow through with proper monitoring and evaluation. And as you know, they say what gets measured gets done. So that is the first thing. The second thing is institutions at organizational level are very, very proactive. They're changing the way they attract, recruit, and retain individuals, especially in terms of balancing the Gender Act. And remember, there's also the smart economic debate behind why women matter at organizational level. Because they say the greater your level of diversity, higher up the organization, the better are your bottom line results. The more diverse your boards are, the more diverse your leadership team is. That is reflected in the results. And then lastly, the women in those countries are taking matters into their own hand. They're not afraid of saying, I'm ambitious, I'm going to make this happen, and I'm going to put all these support systems in place and go for it.
You touched on the individual level. Now, if we look at some of the Scandinavian countries, for example, where things like paternal leave are also important, are we not focusing on policy level too much on women, but also not on the men as well?
Yeah, quite correct. Look at institutions in South Africa. What is the equal process that's applied for both men and women? And my fear always is that if we focus too much on just the women agenda, and we forget that men, A, are still in the driving seat overwhelmingly, and B, that as women become financially independent, there's a power shift that's happening. In creating a new power shift, we have to be careful we don't swing the balance too far, and then we start the cycle again with different kind of issues. So there will be intended and unintended consequences. But the policies within organizations and the corporates need to look at both sides, because again, we're no longer operating in a patriarchal society where men are the major breadwinners. And I know I'm hammering this point because it is true. women are becoming significant breadwinners.
Again, I go back to the World Economic Forum report, where you're hardly seeing any African countries within the top 20, except one, which is Rwanda. Why is that such an outlier, and how has that made it into the top 10?
My take on this is the role that women have played in a country such as Rwanda. Remember, they have had major strife and social fragilities in those countries, huge political turmoil. And women have played significant peacekeeping roles, not just in Rwanda. But if you go back and measure the role of women and the impact of women in war-torn countries, you would see that women play a significant role in bringing communities together with very, very limited resources. And I think that's almost in the DNA of the women in Rwanda.
How important is the symbolic nature of having more women leaders doing more in society?
For me, it's not about being symbolic. It's about who's best for the job. And I do believe there's a time for a different kind of leader and a right time for a certain kind of leader. And I do believe that women bring something, given what we're dealing with in our society right now, in our country. There's complexity, there's ambivalence, there's no linear way of leading anymore, because there's huge upheavals constantly, daily. And I think women bring something more than a symbolism, that women bring a different way of leading.
Shireen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.